The last paragraph of that reading from the Acts of the Apostles is indeed an important one for us, especially these days. With one accord, the crowds paid attention to what was said by Philip. Philip has just replaced Stephen, who was killed. The word of God is now preached by Philip in a way that, in all likelihood, earlier that very day, at least the day before, had been preached by Stephen. And unclean spirits came out of people. People possessed by darkness were freed from that darkness because of the word they heard, the presence that they felt. There was great joy in the city that day. Truly a reason for us to say, thanks be to God. My friends, in a very real way, these past few days, we have been flooded with a multiplicity of images. Images, both old and new, that in many, many ways say the same thing to us. These past few days, we have been flooded with images of springtime. For the first time in a while, we actually are seeing buds on trees. And here in the Northeast, the weather is changing. We see images, we see signs of spring. That reminds us of newness, of new beginnings. In the readings that we have been listening to as Catholics these past few days, beginning with Monday really, we've been given images of faith. Faith and goodness, faith and kindness. On Monday, we listened to the preaching of Stephen, a young man so moved by the presence of God, an individual so filled with God's Spirit that it literally changed his life. He stopped doing whatever it was that he had been doing and became a great teacher, a great preacher. We listened to Stephen preach, praise, really, the presence of God in his life in a desperate attempt to share that newness, that resiliency with those around him. We see people in the crowd who don't like what Stephen is preaching, don't like this newness, this resiliency, this new way of understanding God that he is sharing. And as we traveled into Tuesday, we can see that crowd grow angry. We can see that crowd, in a very real way, rejecting the presence of God that we can hear in the words of Stephen, and allow themselves to be filled with anger and rage, prejudice, darkness. And we see in the end that darkness try to put an end to the preaching of Stephen. And yet in Stephen, we are given an image. As he dies, he sees the Lord ever before him, and he is filled with that light. There's no room in Stephen anymore for fear or darkness or anger or rage. He sees the presence of God before him, and in that moment of his everyday life, he allows that light to be the greater power, pushing out and away the darkness. And Stephen dies with a smile on his face. Today, his preaching continues, for there is no letting go of the power that is the presence and the practice and the word of God. My friends, these past few days, we as a city, a nation, a world really, have been bombarded with images. On the one hand, images of sadness and darkness and heartbreak. We ask so many questions. How can this happen? Why? And we realize there is no answer save the fact that there is darkness at times in our world. And yet, at the same time, we have been flooded with images of human kindness. Human love. From the very beginning of this tragedy that we all share these days, we have been given images of people reaching out to one another. That in the midst of their own fear, they don't empower the fear. They allow the light to be seen as hands reached out, as people were picked up, as people were carried away. No, go take care of them first. They seem to be in worse shape than me. My friends, we've heard those stories over and over again. People who, in their everyday lives, albeit sad moments, allowing light, goodness, kindness. In the midst of confusion, the leaven of kindness is seen, one newspaper headline read. My friends, these days we are reminded of the power of the presence of our God, that Jesus continues to work among us, that Jesus continues to labor in us as we use His grace, not to allow the darkness, the sadness to overpower us, but to see in Him the ability to be who we truly are, people made in the image of God, who is love and light and power and presence and consolation. That's who we are called to be. And when we allow that grace to not only be rooted in us, but when we allow that grace to be used, we find ourselves picking ourselves up, not only ourselves, but those around us, so that the power of His presence and His word can continue to console and save and make new. My friends, these days, you and I are invited to do the same thing that the people in that town did that day. Push out the darkness, so that His light can take root in us in ways that can be seen, felt, and appreciated by those in need. That's what our Easter season, truly, in everyday life, is about.